Viens à moi.
Benedetta nous dupe.
Je sais pas comment Dieu fait arriver les choses.
Avec moi, c'est jouer avec le feu.
The movie begins with the Carlini family traveling to the city of Pest. They stop by a shrine in Medea and ask her daughter Benedetta if she wants to pray. Bendetta's prayer gets interrupted when a group of bandits arrives to rob them of their valuable possessions. A courageous Benedetta tells the bandit leader to return her mother's necklace. She has faith that the Virgin Mother will protect her and hears her prayers. Remarkably, soon after, a bird defecates on one of the bandits. Impressed by Benedetta's apparent influence, the bandit leader returns the stolen necklace and departs peacefully. Later, the family reaches the monastery in Pest. There, Giuliano speaks with Sister Felicita, promising annual gifts in return for Benedetta's training to become the bride of Christ. However, Felicita is dissatisfied with the initial offer and demands additional money. Giuliano attempts to negotiate a lower price, but to no avail. Left with no other choice, he concedes to Felicita's terms. With the money secured, Felicita welcomes Benedetta into the monastery. Sister Jacopa gives Benedetta a change of clothes to prepare her for the monastery life. She takes away the young girl's wooden statue and keeps it inside a cabinet. Sister Jacopa then shows off her wooden finger and says she likes wood on her body. Later that night, Benedetta wakes up and goes to pray in front of the Virgin statue. It falls and almost crushes Benedetta while she's praying. Instead of screaming for her life, the young girl decides to succumb the exposed wooden melons of the Virgin statue. 18 years later, Benedetta is now a beautiful young woman. While in a play, she gets a vision of Jesus. Benedetta meets Jesus, and he asks her to come and join him as his wife. She snaps out of it after another nun wakes her up. Later that day, the monastery holds a feast, organized by the Carlini family. While they eat, Father Secchi complains about their church being unpopular. Father Ricordati agrees and says they should hope for a miracle. Moments later, Medea asks Benedetta what happened during the play. Benedetta tells her that she saw Jesus, and that he called her since she's his girlfriend. Before Benedetta's parents leave, a commotion happens at the front gate. When a nun opens the gate, a terrified Bartolomea and a flock of sheep comes rushing inside. She kneels in front of Benedetta and asks her for help. Shortly after that, a man comes in and tries to drag her out of the monastery. Giuliano and Felicita then step in to stop the commotion. While Bartolomea seeks help from Felicita, the man accompanying her introduces himself as her father. Felicita turns down Bartolomea's plea to stay in the monastery, judging her by her impoverished appearance. Moved by the woman's plight, Benedetta implores her parents to assist. Ultimately, Giuliano covers the cost for Bartolomea's stay, declaring it a gift for Benedetta. That evening, as Benedetta assists Bartolomea in cleaning up, they later head to the bathroom where Benedetta discovers that Bartolomea is accustomed to relieving herself in the streets alongside her cattle. She also discovers that Bartolomea is in a Sweet Home Alabama situation with her father and her brothers. Before going to bed, Bartolomea kisses Benedetta on the lips, and she is surprised by her actions. While in choir practice the next day, Bartolomea slides her fingers into Benedetta's Holy Grail. Immediately after that, Benedetta has another vision where she gets attacked by some horny snakes. She asks Jesus to save her, and he arrives to slay the snakes. He then kisses Benedetta and asks her to stay with him. Shortly after that, Benedetta snaps out of her vision and finds everyone in the choir practice staring at her. She quietly returns to her place and pretends as if nothing happened. I gotta say, Bartolomea must have magic fingers to make someone hallucinate like that. A few days later, Bartolomea gets into an accident with another nun. Benedetta punishes her by making her grab spools of thread in a cauldron filled with boiling water. After learning about the situation, Felicita punishes Benedetta by taking her bread for a week and making her take care of the sick Sister Jacopa. While taking care of Sister Jacopa, Benedetta discovers the sister's chest wounds. Jacopa explains to her that these wounds bring her closer to God. Jealous, Benedetta later examines her own body with a shiny plate to check for similar marks. That night, she begins to suffer from unbearable pain, leading to a panic attack. Felicita restrains her to the bed and calls for a doctor, who, unable to diagnose her condition, decides to sedate Benedetta during her episodes. Later, before sleep, Bartolomea reveals her feelings for Benedetta and kisses her, which triggers another vision for Benedetta. In her vision, she is captured by bandits who threaten her, and she cries out to Jesus for help. Jesus appears to rescue her, but Benedetta soon realizes the man is not Jesus. Awakening from the vision in a panic, the nuns sedate her again. Once she settles, Felicita informs Benedetta that Bartolomea will be her new roommate and will take care of her. While tidying the cabinet, Bartolomea stumbles upon Benedetta's old clothes and a cherished wooden statue. Recognizing its significance to her friend, Bartolomea carefully places it on a nearby table. Later that night, Benedetta is struck by another vision. She sees Jesus on the cross, who instructs her to remove her clothes and touch him. Obeying, Benedetta experiences excruciating pain upon contact. Her screams awaken Bartolomeo, who finds Benedetta naked and in distress on the floor, her hands bleeding. Come morning, Benedetta presents her wounds to the nuns, asserting that they were inflicted by Jesus. The nuns believe it's the stigmata because the wounds resemble the ones Jesus had when he got crucified. Skeptical, Felicita questions Benedetta about her wounds. Eventually, she calls Secchi to examine Benedetta. Felicita believes it isn't the stigmata because there are no wounds on the forehead or Jesus wore the crown of thorns. Secchi tells her not to make conclusions right away. Benedetta leaves the room with Bartolomeo, but she stops by the Virgin statue to pray. While that happens, Felicita and Secchi talk about getting rich if Benedetta becomes a saint. Their conversation abruptly stops after they hear Benedetta screaming in pain from outside. When they go outside to check, they find her on the floor with a wound on her forehead. She then speaks in a man's voice and reveals a prophecy about the coming plague. Christina examines the scene and sees broken glass on the floor. She tells Felicita that Benedetta is just putting up a show. Felicita tries to tell Secchi that the force has gone too far, but it seems he has other plans. Unable to understand it by his greed, Secchi declares to everyone that the Lord is speaking through Benedetta. He then calls Felicita out for trying to deny a true miracle. Realizing what he's doing, Felicita decides to go with the flow. Sometime later, people from all over the city bring offerings to the monastery. With the news about Bendetta's miracle, an ascendance to sainthood has spread like wildfire. While that happens, Christina talks to Felicita about Bendetta's lies. Since Christina can't prove her claims, Felicita tells her there's nothing they can do but accept things as they are. In disbelief, Christina asks her mother why she's defending Benedetta. Felicita decides to brush everything off as God's way of working mysteriously. Later that night, Benedetta wakes Bartolomeo and tells her that Jesus gave her his heart. She tells Bartolomeo to touch it so she can feel how big it is. Being a peasant's child, Bartolomeo doesn't know what the heart looks like, so she decides to play with Benedetta's perky melons instead. Suddenly, the other nuns arrive after hearing loud moan. Bartolomeo tells them that it's only Benedetta having a nightmare. The following day, Secchi organizes a ceremony to honor Benedetta's ascendance to sainthood. In the course of the ceremony, Secchi requests that Felicita relinquish her possessions to Benedetta. Felicita complies without any objections. When Christina attempts to challenge the decision, Felicita swiftly silences her protests. Later that day, Felicita gives her room to Benedetta. Before she leaves, Felicita opens a hole in the wall to the other room. Shortly after that, Benedetta and Bartolomeo arrive and relish their new accommodations. Before getting a chance for intimacy, a nun enters the room and informs Benedetta about Jacopa's worsening condition. When Benedetta arrives at Jacopa's room, Felicita volunteers to stay and take care of her. In response, Benedetta says someone else should handle Jacopa's care. She wants Felicita to be present during her first mass that day. Christina decides to take her mother's place and take care of Jacopa. Before leaving the room, Benedetta tells Jacopa that Secchi said nothing about her condition. Shortly thereafter, Christina confronts Felicita for remaining passive, while Benedetta mocks her. Felicita explains to Christina that it's all strategic, believing that cooperating with Benedetta will financially benefit the monastery. Disagreeing with her mother's approach, Christina, dubbed the Real Housewife of Bethlehem, insists that people deserve to know the truth. Felicita warns Christina that she won't support her if she continues to be obstinate. After the conversation, Jacopa passes away in Christina's presence. Subsequently, Christina visits Ricordati to request that he hear her confession. Though unwilling at first, Ricordati gives in to her request. While confessing, Christina says that she witnessed Benedetta faking her stigmata. Later that night, Benedetta and Bartolomeo fail to control their emotions. They get intimate with each other, but Benedetta seems unsatisfied with Bartolomeo's short fingers. To make up for her poor initial performance, Bartolomeo uses her mouth and makes her partner experience heaven and earth. During mealtime the next day, Ricordati asks Christina to share her claims about Benedetta in front of everyone. After sharing, Ricordati asks Felicita to confirm it, but she discredits her daughter's claims. In the end, Benedetta forces Christina to whip herself in front of everyone. One night, Bartolomeo turns Bendetta's wooden statue into a pleasure rod. While the two women play with a wooden toy, Felicita watches them through the hole in the wall. After playing, Bartolomeo notices a bright red glow from the window. Everyone goes outside and sees a red comet in the sky. Moments later, they see Christina on top of the church. Felicita rushes to stop her daughter from taking her life, but she fails. In anguish because of her loss, Felicita doesn't allow Benedetta to bless Christina's soul. When Benedetta insists, Felicita attacks her. Later that night, Felicita leaves the monastery to go to Florence. Distressed with Felicita's actions, Benedetta tries to distress by getting intimate with Bartolomeo. Unfortunately, Bartolomea isn't in the mood because she's afraid of what might happen next. In the end, Benedetta decides to do it herself. Later on, Felicita arrives in the plague-stricken city of Florence and meets with the head priest, Alfonso. She discloses Benedetta's deceptions to him. With Alfonso showing signs of skepticism, Felicita urges him to visit Pest to see the truth for himself. Alfonso agrees to go, but warns Felicita of severe repercussions if her allegations prove to be false. That same night in Pest, a procession is held, during which Secchi proclaims to the townspeople that the plague is divine punishment for their sins. Benedetta then assures everyone that God has promised to spare Pest from the plague, leading to celebrations of their impending salvation. Amidst the festivities, Benedetta discreetly approaches one of the city guards. She discreetly orders him to lock the city gates and prevent anyone from going in or out of the city. Her deception aside, that is a genius move from Benedetta. On her way inside the monastery, Benedetta suddenly falls to the ground and plays dead. When Felicita and Alfonso arrive at Pest a few days later, they find the city in lockdown. Secchi opens the gate and informs them about their new rules. Being a high authority in the church, Alfonso forces Secchi to let them into the city. Alfonso learns that Benedetta died and immediately proceeds to inspect her corpse. When Alfonso starts blessing her with oil, Benedetta wakes up and foretells a prophecy. Since Felicita is right, Alfonso tells Benedetta of the charges against her. The next day, Alfonso holds a trial to expose Benedetta's lies. During that time, Felicita is the star witness, and she tells everyone about Benedetta and Bartolomea's wooden toy. Alfonso questions Bartolomea about her lesbian relationship with Benedetta, but she denies it. To loosen Bartolomea's lips, Alfonso has her tortured. Unable to bear the pain of the torturer's metal kitty spreader, Bartolomea betrays Benedetta. She reveals the location of the wooden toy to Alfonso, and he orders Benedetta's imprisonment. Shortly after that, Alfonso learns that the plague has infected Felicita. Afraid, he orders his servant to isolate the woman and burn everything she touched. As events unfold, the nuns expel Bartolomea from the monastery. Upon leaving, she quickly steals some clothes and escapes. Later, Alfonso finalizes Benedetta's judgment in the presence of Secchi and Ricordati. Despite their protests, Alfonso remains resolute in his decision. After the priests depart, Alfonso notices symptoms of the plague on his chest, realizing he too is infected. That night, Benedetta visits the ailing Felicita, and they discuss the fate of Christina's soul, presumed to be in hell. Benedetta whispers something mysterious into Felicita's ear. The following day, as Benedetta is brought to the town square for execution, Bartolomea calls out to her, seeking forgiveness for her betrayal. Before the execution begins, Alfonso offers Benedetta one last opportunity to confess her falsehoods. Instead of confessing, Benedetta shocks the crowd by predicting that Pest will be ravaged by the plague, cleverly shifting the blame onto Alfonso with Felicita's tacit support. The people start getting out of control as the guards bring Benedetta to the stake. As the executioner lights the stake, chaos erupts, and the townspeople fight the guards to free Benedetta. Scared for his life, Alfonso tries to escape but gets captured. The people rip him apart, and he dies after facing Benedetta for the last time. While Benedetta and Bartolomea leave, they see Felicita plunge into the flaming stake. The following day finds Benedetta and Bartolomea in an abandoned house, both unclothed. Benedetta resolves to return to Pest, despite Bartolomea's attempts to dissuade her. Unfortunately, Bartolomea is unable to sway her lover from this decision. Benedetta leaves for Pest without looking back at the angry Bartolomea. The movie ends after we learn that Benedetta fails to manipulate the church, and she ends up in prison for her lies.